everyone. I'm just here with John Lonergan, former Governor of Mountjoy. John was anxious to support our cause, and he has done through letters of support for the redevelopment of Player Wills, Teresa's Gardens and the surrounding areas. First of all, I'm going to apologise. I said to John, you're probably going to get the most unprofessional interview that you've ever been subjected to your life. And also, I suppose with two Corkmen and a Tipman, we probably should put subtitles on this for all the dubs that are going to be listening. But so I think most people here this evening will know John, but maybe you could kick off, John, by just giving us background for some of the younger people who might know you and how you ended up in Mountjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm native of a little place called Bancha in West Tipperary. Very famous little place many years ago, 60, 70 years ago, because it was very much identified with Canon Hayes, who was the founder of Mointon Atira, who was all about community, building communities and supporting communities, and particularly in rural Ireland. But I mean, the principle he ingrained in everybody was the need for community. And he once described a community as a social mix of equals, which was a wonderful description of what a community should be about. And then I subsequently joined the prison service in 1968 and spent 42 years in the prison system. I was appointed governor of Mountjoy in 1984, and in total spent 22 years there as governor and 4 years in Portlaoise. And I suppose my background and my connection with social deprivation and the consequences of it was very much Mountjoy. Becoming aware that so many people from the most socially disadvantaged areas ended up in prison, and I simply asked a question: why is it only young people, mainly young men, from these particular areas in Dublin City, 6 small little tiny areas in 6 separate postal districts, contributed 75% of all Dublin-born prisoners? And I just questioned, said, how come that is the reality? Are they the only people committing crime? And of course they weren't. So that raised my awareness, and as a result of that I got some research done and spoke publicly about it with the intention of making society aware of its responsibility and its contribution to people who end up in trouble. We respond when they're in trouble. We forget our responsibility to prevent trouble in the first place, which is the best solution of all.
You mentioned there about some of these coming from small pockets of Dublin, and I believe in around, for the area that we're talking about, in around through Player Wills, Teresa's Gardens, and around some of the places in Dublin 8, was there much of a concentration of those people in the prison from that area?
Oh, huge. Mountjoy would be very overrepresented in that whole catchment area. For years, even before my time, but certainly during all my time in Mountjoy, it would have been very heavily represented there. Many streets and roads where every family had a connection with Mountjoy. And not alone that, which is even more depressing, many generations of the same family were there. So indeed, in my time in Mountjoy, I was myself into the 3rd generation, believe it or not. So the grandparents were there, the parents were there, and now the 3rd generation were there. And I actually met grandparents visiting their grandchildren in Mountjoy after they had been visiting their own children in Mountjoy. And the sad reality was that in addition to all that, many of the 2nd generation of those families were dead as a result of drugs. And the grandparents were now rearing their 2nd family, and they were again back to Mountjoy. And that will just highlight the consequences of neglect, because I've always said it was neglect by society. We created those areas and we failed to resource them, we failed to take interest in the people there, but we expect the people and families in particular to grow up and to be able to compete with children from more affluent areas where the resources are poured into. And that's why I became aware of, and that's where I became a voice, or why I became a voice in trying to, I suppose, give those families and those people a voice that would indicate and challenge the general perception is, was and is still, that it's their fault. And I've always said everyone must take responsibility for their own actions, but we also have a national and a community and a societal responsibility. And I'm afraid if you were to ask me what would I think or how do I feel about society in general, I would say they have failed miserably. And particularly this year, 2016, cherishing all our children equally, it should be an embarrassment for anybody in authority in Ireland, in government or in local authorities or whatever it is, to think that with so many children have been so badly neglected and let down.
Yeah, and in the area that we're in, as I said, like that's the consequences and where they end up. But looking at going back a step, and I was saying we often find Irish solution to an Irish problem. Like you look at something like a banking crisis, and they're doing the inquiry afterwards when something should have been done beforehand. You look at people going into Mountjoy when the resolution is they go up in court and they're put in jail, and that's the solution. But really, the solution isn't there. To me, it should be much earlier, from when they walk out of hospital, when they walk out of the comb, or when there should be some sort of structures there. So in terms of the local community, any like preventative measures that you think should be put in place? And I suppose we're just talking about our own local community in around here, in around Jesus Gardens and that. What kind of preventative measures do you think? There's councillors, politicians, TDs, Gardaí here this evening. Like, what kind of structures do you think they can do something about and catch this at an earlier stage rather than at a later stage?
There are numerous things, obviously, that need to be done, and many elements of society in relation to education, in relation to healthcare, in relation to recreation and activities. That we are focusing tonight, and Kevin's are focusing to a large degree on the recreation and amenities and facilities that would enable a community to get that part of their life and their activities right. I have absolutely no hesitation. I have described it on a number of occasions. Many of these areas are nothing other than concrete jungles. There's just concrete, bleak, dead, depressing concrete with no facilities. Actually, they're a risk to the safety of children in terms of the type of structures that are there. So I have no hesitation in saying that open space, green space, an environment that will be uplifting, along with facilities that will engage young people in. There's nothing better than sport to engage young people in, to give them a sense of purpose, to give them a sense of identity, to give them, it provides discipline for them, and it gives them something to live for. And it raises their spirits and right across the spectrum. It's the same for families. There's somewhere for them to go. There's something for them to do. They have something that they can aim for. In many cases, they're attainable objectives that they'll have, because participating in underage, for instance, there's every chance that they can win or compete with other communities, and that gives them a sense that I'm as good as the rest, which they are, but they have been deprived the opportunity. So having the facilities immediately available within the community, to give the community an identity and a control over the facilities, and to associate the facilities with the communities, that is essential if we are to make. And I have always said, you compare in many of these areas, including your area and Kevin, you compare the lack of facilities in that area, and compared with the facilities in the area where I live, for instance, in Lonergan and Kilmacud, which I've been associated with Kilmacud Crokes for many years. Look at the amenities and the facilities in that part of Dublin, and still we expect the children in the Kevin's catchment area to compete with the children out there when they have almost everything at their disposal in terms of sporting amenities and facilities and all those sorts of things. So I have no hesitation in saying the environment is crucial. An environment where there's openness, where there's natural light, where there's green, where there's space. And for me, it's not an option. It's just an essential element in the building of any community. And I'm afraid our local authorities in particular have neglected that to the detriment to a huge cost in terms of so many families being devastated with drugs and with crime, and subsequently with Mountjoy. And this is the most devastating of all experience for a parent, to have a child ending up on drugs first of all, and then almost inevitably ended up in Mountjoy. I don't know of anything other than serious illness that is devastating and has such horrific consequences for families and for communities.
I must say I fully agree. Is that, as I keep saying in some of these meetings we have, is that would they accept this in some of the other parts of Dublin, like the areas that you've named? Would they accept it in Tipperary? Would they accept it in Cork? And maybe our politicians need to be a lot more vocal when they go into Dublin City Council, and maybe they're being led in a path that other areas are a lot more vocal than our councillors, than our politicians, and they're getting more resources and facilities than we are. And we've had discussions about places like Maribone Lane and Jesus Gardens. Even if we got those two, it wouldn't bring us near a fraction of what other communities have. And this is the last chance, basically, that we see in the community, is that there really isn't another option. these sites go, it's gone, we will be forever left with the consequences, and there's no turning back, because they're not going to, in 20 years or 10 years, flatten loads of houses to put in community facilities and recognise the mistakes that they've made in the past in planning. So just another question then is that just an interesting statistic is of the schools we've got in Trees Gardens, there's 11 schools within walking distance, and 10 of those have no green space whatsoever. Now, how do you comment on that? Like, what do you say to the panels? Is it the Department of Education, or is it the council?
I think it's everybody's responsibility. I don't think I said earlier on, I don't think, JJ, that any particular element of society can exonerate themselves and say, well, it's not my responsibility. Well, it is. Our education system is our education system, and our education system has a responsibility to create an environment where children are enabled to grow to their full potential. If they don't have open space and green space, for instance, that straight away is a huge deficit. And not alone would I say it's essential. There's no such thing as not being done. This has to be done, and for that to happen, we live in a democracy. At least we are told we live in a democracy. The element of democracy in this case is local authority and local city councillors. We elect them. They are responsible back to the communities. Planners and officials in local authorities and at national level are responsible and accountable to the politicians. It's up to the politicians to make the planners accountable and to ask the right questions and to demand the right answers. And not alone that, I'd be saying, because often we condition people in deprived areas, socially deprived areas, sort of give them something like the crumbs from his master's table, and now you should be happy. I'd be saying the very opposite. We need to put a state-of-the-art facilities into this community. We need to indicate to this community and to the families that live in it and the volunteers that work at, day and night, giving of their time and their expertise to keep that community functioning. We need to resource them. Local authorities and central government and the GA itself at national level, I believe they have one key responsibility, and that is provide the resources. The rest of the infrastructure is there. The local community is there, the activists are there, the expertise is there. The only thing you need are the resources to do it. In this case, and the allocation of space as a number one priority, that there's an allocation of suitable space given over to sport activities and not playgrounds, where people gain the soft option. We put a playground in. A playground will only create more difficulty, where people, especially young teenagers, will be lazing around the place and creating difficulty and using drugs, and it'll become a no-go area. The difference in providing an active sporting facility is that it will be active. There'll be people there all the time. There'll be action there all the time, and it'll give the community a sense of identity and a sense of purpose. So for me, it's not an option. It's an essential thing that must be done. And I think that nobody, irrespective of who they are, nobody can wash their hands of this and say it's not my responsibility. It's all our responsibility. We created those areas, we sustained them, and now we must take responsibility to do something positive about it. And that's for me, by the way, it's a very, very small demand. It's a tiny demand, asking the local authority at the moment, in this case, in that catchment area of the south inner city, to allocate adequate space to enable an absolutely essential community amenity to be put in place. That is not something that you be over the top or that you should be apologising for. I would say you demand that, and you accept nothing less except a state-of-the-art facility to at least compensate those communities. And the final point I make on that is, you are not just responding to the young people of today, and they deserve to be responded to, but if you respond to them and you enable them and empower them and support them and nurture them to their full potential, then you have changed not this generation but all future generations as well. Now, what is the cost of neglecting that? Future generations in Mountjoy, where it'll cost 70 to 80,000 a year to keep one person, and what are they doing there? Wasting their time in a most destructive, depressing environment. So far better to spend those 80,000 out in the community to help prevention. And early intervention and early prevention is the only solution. along with education. I've always said that, I believe it. And by the way, the education I'm talking about is not formal academic education exclusively. I believe that sport is a wonderful education facility itself. People learn so much in sport, about themselves, about others. They learn respect, they learn discipline, they learn how to compete, they build their own confidence and self-esteem. So sport for me, competitive sport, all types of sport, is in itself an essential element of our educational system.
John, thank you very much. So everybody here this evening, I think for both parents, for politicians, for TDs, for school teachers, everybody that's attending this evening, like, I think you see the passion and the urgency that's needed here to get proper facilities in Teresa's Gardens. So I hope everybody will, when they're voting, talk with their votes, and also to make sure that every councillor that comes around, that they're aware of the urgency of this, that we get what's not something nice to have in the area, but what is it essential to have in the area.